Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli. Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea. Innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire. Non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
la civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buonasera a tutti.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being with us this evening. This is the title of today's session, Leadership, Competitiveness, and the Common Good. We're going to have a talk with our speakers, trying to deepen the meaning of some words, and in particular, we're going to focus on the term leadership and on the connection between leadership and the common good. This topic will be discussed within the framework of a conversation, including that sees the participation of entrepreneurs, businesswomen and businessmen, and other members. My name is Francesco Cassese, and today I will chair this meeting.
Subito a presentare il parterre.
So first of all, allow me to start by introducing to you our guests. We have Mario Abbadessa on my right, Senior Managing Director and Country Head of Hines, Italy. Hines is a global development and real estate company. It was founded about 65 years ago, and it works in about 65 countries all over the world. Mario has worked as country head since 2015. He's one of the youngest managers in the group. Sitting next to him, we have Antonio Funiciello, who is an expert in communication, journalist, and essayist. Since 2018, he's been holding the chair of head of holding an investment identity at Eni, and he collaborated with previous former Prime Ministers Mario Draghi and Paolo Gentiloni. He wrote a couple of books for Rizzoli. The one he published in 2019 is entitled Il metodo Machiavelli, come servire il potere e salvarsi l'anima, so the Machiavelli method, how to serve the power and save your soul. We're not going to delve into the content of this book, but we're going probably to focus on his second book, Leader per forza, the leadership che attraversano i deserti. So forced leaders, histories of leaders who cross deserts. Then Gianluca Giansante, who's been working as a professional, supporting companies and top managers, and at the same time has done research and training. He's a partner at Comin Partners, and he supports the growth of companies and top managers with communication and institutional relations. He's a professor at Luiss Guido CarliJournalist, and he does research in the field of communication and consensus building. Gianluca, too, wrote a book that was published in 2023. The title is Leadership, Theories, Techniques, Good Practices and False Myths. And then last but not least, we have Christian Malangone since 2004. He has grown professionally after having worked at the Lombardy region, and he's now worked in the public administration, and he's now general director at the Municipality of Milan. He hasn't written any books, however. Starting from 6:37 a.m. in the morning, his main tasks is basically consists in making sure that the whole structure of the Municipality of Milan is fit and functioning. Now, allow me to give you some preliminary remarks. I start from an article of Kaiser and Hogan in 2005. The title was, what we know about leadership? And he started by saying leadership is one of the most important topics within the field of human sciences and one of the least understood. And that's why I would like to start from the very basics. I am going to make a couple of main remarks. The first, why is it important today to talk about leadership? Why are we talking about leadership, and why are we emphasizing the role of managerial skills less? Leadership is something which is in progress. It's work in progress. Leadership means being capable of, in a way, intercepting, anticipating future changes, and in a way being able to identify skills. So the leader is the one who identifies the direction, who's capable of motivating his or her people, while managers are people who normally manage something that is foreseeable, well-ordered. So serving as a manager means basically having to deal with control and problem solving. Today we talk about leadership because our world is rapidly evolving, and this is one of the, so to say, hottest topics currently being debated. Then I have another remark I'd like to share with you, which is the following. Leadership is both an old and a modern, both an ancient and a modern concept. The first leaders can be traced back to many years ago. So, for example, characters, profiles like Moses, but at the same time they're also very new. You've probably noticed that there are lots of biographies currently being written of sports people, businessmen, managers. And this basically indicates that one needs to communicate values that can guide our actions. Of course, examples do not fit to any individual case. I mean, anyone will be capable of kind of identifying the things that are most suitable to themselves. The most dangerous thing is to have some kind of an individualistic vision of the figure of a leader. And from this point of view, I think that this also highlights and some kind of a conflict of a clash with the title of the meeting, because the title of the meeting, of this session of the Rimini meeting, is about friendship. I will keep the time, so we will have a first round of contributions, which will be very short. I will ask a question, and the question will be the same to all our guests. And then there will be a second and third round of contributions, which will be a bit longer. So my question to all of you is the following. We all have the right to ask ourselves, what kind of leadership do we need today and why? And I'd like to start with Mario. We need leaders who believe in what they do. Leadership means believing in what you do. Here at the meeting, a major leader was Father Giussani before us, and actually he was asked, why do you think that you have so many followers? And very concisely he answered, because I believe in what I do. So to me, a leader is a person who knows, who believes in what he does, he or she does. Thank you. There are no leaders for all seasons. We need leaders which are in line with the moment, with the time we are living in. The time we're living in is rich in transformations. The old world is ending, the new world is about to begin, and very challenging, very difficult challenges are awaiting us. And the latest one is that of artificial intelligence. So leaders, the true leaders are the ones who are capable of applying old skills as well as inventing new ones, of revisiting the importance of creation and imagination in leadership. To answer your question, I think that we have to stress one aspect. When we talk about leadership, we always think about something that makes me think, for example, that helps me think how I become, let's say, a CEO or a head or a chief. So leadership is something else. Scientifically, leadership means the abilities, the skills, the behaviors which enable me to motivate people so that these people work for a common good, for a shared good. In other words, these people are willing, thanks to leadership, to, in a way, set their personal interests aside in order to work for a common objective. And the leadership that we need is actually to have someone who does this first, because people will eventually follow someone who is the very first one to set his or her interests aside for a common good. And I think this is the kind of leadership that we need today. Christian, actually, I am, well, I'm struggling, I have to say, because I have to speak last. I can tell you actually what's the main feature of today's leaders. When I was a university student, I happened to work as a waiter, for example, during the summer holidays to pay my university studies. So I started working as a waiter. And when I was first instructed on how to do my task, on how to carry out my tasks, I was told that the waiter is someone who serves a community by serving each and any individual at the table. To me, I mean, this is something that I will always have with me. This is a teaching that will always accompany me. The best image, the best representation of leadership that comes to my mind is precisely this. Okay, now we have a second round of questions, and you can speak for a bit longer. So, Hines, Italy. Hines, Italy extracts value from what already exists. Your approach on the market is a bottom-up approach. So you start from the bottom up, you extract the value of the real estate, and then you're capable of enhancing this value and at the same time to generate margins on your investments. Can you explain to us this approach? Does this kind of approach require a specific type of leadership, and do you think that in recent years the Hines Italian organization is asking us to change something in the way that the company is led? Well, we invest money. Our investors are pension funds, sovereign funds. They're all foreign funds. Actually, in Italy, we invested about 7 billion euros. And like all those who do my job, we then have to return the money that was invested, integrated with a return on the investment. That's our work. And there are two ways to do this. You can do this through financial trading. So you buy and sell, for example, shares, industrial shares, securities, or real estate, like the ones like what we do. Or we can return this capital with through a development, industrial development. So instead of buying real estate at a given price, then wait for the correct moment, for the right moment to resell it after some time. Or we can buy, for example, property, a piece of land or a building, renovate it, and then maybe sell it. Or we, in a way, give rights in this property in the long run. So the bottom-up approach is an industrial type bottom-up approach in which we generate profit, but we do this through the revamping, so to say, of that specific asset and through a specific industrial policy. There are about 5,000 homes for students in Milan or in Florence, for example. We have other buildings that we rent. We do logistics services. We use our property for whatever purposes. And the most important the leadership characteristics is very complicated in our work, and that is due to the fact that we have an industrial type of approach and not a financial one, and therefore we have to deal with a varied type of colleagues. For example, I have to deal with engineers. We do not outsource our technical competencies. We have it in-house because we believe it is a distinctive feature, and this is unlike all other trading funds. Then there are collaborators who manage the building, the ones who are in charge of purchasing it, a marketing team, a bookkeeping group. Then we also have relations with journalists, with the public administration. In other words, the difficult role of the leader at Hines is to kind of interact with many different types of profiles because of their different tasks. So, Antonio, as you wrote in the book Leadership per Forza, Forced Leadership, you tell the stories of Truman, Cavour, Lincoln, Golda Meir, Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel. And the first leader you talk about in your book is the reluctant leader, Moses, the one who guided, who led the people in the desert. And the legacy he left to his followers was the promised land that he will never reach. So here lies the power of the real leadership. And for example, you wrote this title, Leader per Forza, forced leader, may be equivocal, may lead to misunderstandings. Can you explain this? Golda Meir was an important leader in Israel, and once said Moses lived in the desert for 40 years. He brought us basically here in the only area in the Middle East where there was no oil. So basically what was intended here was that leadership is necessary. The title, Leader per Forza, forced leadership, is, plays with the word force, on the strength of leadership. Goldbright, an American economist, a U.S. economist of the 1950s, once wrote that whether you actually access a supermarket, a company, the first thing you ask is that you ask who's in charge, who leads the place. That anticipates, that is very much anthropological. You need to know who is in charge, who leads the place where you are. And I think that this is essential. In my book, I basically try and do this. There are lots of prejudices which are sometimes misleading. They lead us off the beaten track. So the idea of having just one person who's decision maker, and most of the times only males. But fact is that strong leaders are leaders who delegate. Strong leaders are those who are capable of organizing and planning. Strong leaders are those who can take care of their own narcissistic willingness, those who are willing to run against the tide. So we need leadership, and this need for a leader is a primary need. Back to Golda Meir, she once said, she was once asked what leadership for her means, and she basically, she served as a prime minister, as a labor minister, a founder of the State of Israel, and she said, actually, I don't know what leadership means. I just know that the other evening I was at the opera, and at a given point, I entered an elevator. There were dozens of people. Everybody was basically standing without doing anything. And I pushed a button, and the elevator started.
Gianluca, your book is entitled Leadership, Good Practices, Technical Theories, and False Myths. So I'd like to start from the end to actually dismantle some paradigms. So I ask you, what do you mean by this? If you write leadership on Google, you see the images that come out. There is always a man that actually leads a series of other men. I was going to buy my newspaper in the morning. I saw a book with an interesting title on leadership, and I brought it home. So then I realized the cover of the book. There was this man who was jumping off a mountain, a cliff, in a very elegant way, diving elegantly. So the leader seems to be someone who has charisma and leads everyone else. So this is the first false myth. As Antonio was saying before, you needed to delegate, you needed to let people participate. The first and most important feature of a leader, and this emerges in every scientific study, is the one that I've seen in an historical anecdote. Louis Philippe, who was the king of France in the 19th century, was in a small village in Metz, and he was in the communal hall. He had to walk through the military, and he started the troops, and it started to rain. So he looked at his people because he thought they were going to bring him
A questo punto
a cap. And so, well, nobody did, so he started walking, and everyone started to applaud and cheer. And he did realize something that, so in a series of letters that he wrote to his wife, he always said, today it was raining and I had a great success, or he would write, the sun was out today, so it didn't go that well. Why did this happen? Well, because the people identify themselves with the king. So there are so many different historical examples, from Hannibal sleeping with his troops to Caesar, who leaves his own hut to a friend and sleeps under the stars, and then Alexander the Great, who refused to drink water because the rest of his army was thirsty. So that means that a leader has to be one of us if he wants to lead us. And this is something that really impressed me. So going back to our modern times, at the beginning of the pandemic, nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what was the right thing to do. Then the president of the Republic, who will be here at the Rimini meeting tomorrow, sent a message to the nation telling us what we had to do. At the end, there is a little piece of this message that was not officially recorded, that went on all the social networks, and there was his spokesman, Filippo Grasso, who said, you have to put your hair straight. And he answered, well, I cannot go to have a haircut to the barber shop, just like anyone else at this time. Well, no one would have been scandalized or shocked if the president had hired a barber to cut his hair during the pandemic, but he decided to follow the rules just everybody else. So, well, this is an example in a way. So if we want to motivate people to do something, we have to do that same thing ourselves. So this is one of the main characteristics that make us follow someone. Or if this leader doesn't do what he asks us to do, well, we don't follow him anymore. So we have seen so many leaders like Hitler, Mao Zedong, who didn't do that. But anyway, there are different other characteristics that are needed. Christian. In public organizations, we find more resistance to change rather than encouragement for retribution and growth. So now you are facing a big challenge to introduce changes that can create a higher level of efficiency in the public service. So is this a real challenge in the public world? How do you face this challenge?
La domanda non è, diciamo, semplice. Allora,
Well, it is quite a difficult question. There is another element that needs to be considered and that actually complicates everything. At the end of the pandemic, or after the pandemic, the attractiveness of a public administration towards young people has decreased substantially. Well, this is something that concerns also other sectors. There is a new relationship between those who offer jobs and those who look for jobs. In the past, we talked about the merit of work, the content. Today we have a different kind of approach, at least in Milan. I don't want to simplify, but this is exactly how matters stand. How many days of smart working can I have? What are my career opportunities, and so on. So, well, we'll have time to judge this and face this in a more structured way. But this is one of the consequences of COVID that are more important and make it difficult to answer to your first question. The number of people that participated at our selections, at our tests to become a part of public administrations, our tenders, shows exactly this. And this is the first part that is connected to someone else, another element, that is to say the matter of wages and the responsibilities within public administrations. It is a theme that has been tackled in a very simplified way. So there are many people who try to work less than they should, because that's actually our experience in the past. And then there is this group of people that are not only politicians, but also the managers of public administrations. So this obviously doesn't give a positive image of our public administration and doesn't make them attractive to young people. So what are we doing to face this challenge? The Municipality of Milan has over 13,000 people who cover different positions, engineers, accountants, and so on. So we have tried, or we have started to involve the management, but also all the other levels of the public administration in a reflection on this change, so that this change is something that is shared, discussed, and known by everyone. As it was said before, change, and this is a sort of paradox, so to speak, is maybe the most real thing we can find. Every one of us change, our bodies change, life changes. It is as if men had a tendency to change, and if men were equipped to change. So where does this mismatch start? It starts when, in case of a change, no one shares the reasons, the goals, the modality of these changes. So I believe this is the aspect that public administrations need to reflect upon. We need to actually make a change here. The second part of your question is even more complex. So you asked what makes you capable of facing this or overcoming this challenge? Well, I believe that every one of us needs to answer this question every day in his professional or her professional life. Every one of us have their own responsibilities. What I can say is that I was lucky enough in my life to meet some examples that made me want to take this direction. My father was a bus driver, and then I had a professor in high school, and then when I worked for the region Lombardy, I met many people, and I started to learn, to become familiar with this kind of approach. And yeah, this is exactly what brought me where I am. And then the encounter with Beppe Sala. I worked with him, with Moratti, Letizia Moratti, with the Expo, with the organization of the Olympic Games. So this is my answer. Thank you. So we are perfectly on time, so thank you for that. And now I would like to have a second round of questions. So I'm starting again with Mario. You work on creating value, so and you reuse historical buildings. So I'm asking you, what does it mean to create value and to take value out of people, from your co-workers, from your colleagues, in a context that is ever-changing, particularly with the youth who have needs that are probably different from ours? I met Beppe Sala, I met Jerry Hines, the founder of the Hines Group, in 2010. I became CEO at the end of 2015 when I was 31, and I could see the difference between the American model and the Italian model. In our profession, we don't have the opportunity to be a leader if you do not involve your colleagues, your co-workers in the company's capital. So, well, we have a binary model in the United States, which is completely different from that of Italy. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but when I was 32, I didn't have a salary. I don't have a salary. I have a part of the yields of the Italian branch of this company. So in Italy, we started really from zero. So I didn't have the money to invest. We co-invest directly. So the group even had to lend me money to invest. And the reasoning they do is quite simple. They're very business-oriented, being Americans. If the company has success, then partners are legitimate to have an economic success. If the company loses, partners lose as well. So this is what happens to me, but all of my co-workers, all my colleagues, I have 90 colleagues that participate in projects and have and part of the capital invested in the project. So this is the best way to actually yield the best value from people, because they feel responsible. You don't need to be ashamed in saying this, because they want the economic success of the project in the first place. But the success of a project also creates a good image, a good reputation for the investment on the market. So this is a good factor of aggregation within a project. In our specific case, extracting value from people means believing, as I was saying, believing in a mission we have in our work and to be aligned in our interests. We needed to have a real partnership. So, well, maybe less for the leadership, but more for everyone else, so to speak. So this is a model that dates back to the 1960s. in the world, in Italy since 2015. So this is the kind of experience that I can share with you to answer your question. So this model of participation in the success of the company has a positive impact also for the youngest. Absolutely. We in Italy have well, we're 90 people working together. We are the first European office. We even been in Germany, and the average age is 32 years. So we've been really lucky. So since it's early, and in order to make it a little more difficult for the moderator, I wanted to follow up to what Christian was saying.
Si parla della pubblica amministrazione.
The Municipality of Milan, and I talk about this often because as a community of leaders, if you allow me to say so, we need to do this because there is a very negative opinion on the public administration. So this gives an image that is actually negative abroad. I have investors in Kuwait, in Great Britain, in the United States, in Singapore, and I can tell you that the idea we actually give of our administration is worse than reality. We have an office in France, we have an office in Madrid, and you can believe me when I say that the Municipality of Milan works better than that of Madrid and Paris. I'm not saying this because we have a representative of the Municipality of Milan here, but we didn't work in all Italian municipalities because there was no trust towards the Italian public administration. However, in cities where, like Milan or Florence, it's possible to work this way. So as a leader, it is extremely important to acknowledge that our public administrations are working fine, and that there is a very good know-how, a level of knowledge that is higher than that of the private sector very often. The technicians or the experts of the public administration, for instance, in the construction sector, are extremely well prepared, and they teach private experts how to work. So as a community, now we should try to help, support public experts who has a very difficult position to cover in his work. So this is something we have to do, but I just wanted to, well, stress the fact that there are some Italian administrations that work really, really well. But the context where they work makes it very difficult for them to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your follow-up.
Allora, Antonio.
So, Antonio, in your book, you tell an anecdote on Mario Draghi. I would like to comment a bit on this anecdote, and after the anecdote you say the following: being aware of the fact that we are not permanent here, being aware of the fact that there's someone coming before and people will come after, induces us to think about our own leadership role in our context. So leadership is a historical phenomenon. It matters not so much for what it is in the present times in which it operates, but rather for what it leaves behind it after the man or the woman who served as a leader finishes his leadership. And this is basically the thesis of this book. I mean, it is the legacy of a leadership that gives value to the leadership. I think this is quite original. So the episode why is important for a leadership to focus on what is being left, on the legacy? One has to talk about the connection between leadership and time. In the first times in which I worked with Mario Draghi, I remember that the Draghi government swore before the president in January 2021. And back then, we had to acknowledge and understand the problems, the many problems we had to deal, and also especially to delve into the problem of the pandemic. We had to deal with a huge vaccination, a vast vaccination campaign. I mean, it was not easy. And all of us were coming from other jobs. I mean, up to some days before, I would serve as a company. I was serving in a company. And I asked the government to help him as head of his cabinet. In those first days, after having discussed for a long time about COVID and vaccination and many of these things, I was going out of the office of the president, and while I was going out, he stopped me on the threshold, and actually he called me and he said to me, "Have you noticed that in Palazzo Chigi there are lots of clocks?" So from far away, I saw that indeed there was a clock on his desk, and I answered, "Yes, Mr. President, these are clocks going back to the 1800s." And the second time that I told him these are French clocks, and he replied, "Actually, yes, they're French, but none of them works." And so he basically told me, "Well, let's repair them, let's fix them." Why did this strike me so much? Because somehow the idea that there was something that was not working in that building was, something that he didn't like, starting from the clock. Decision makers, real leaders, have quite a problematic relationship with time, and this emerged from the things we've said this evening. I mean, they have to, they're faced with a reality, and the reality is a pressing reality. So members of parliament need time because the legislature, the legislative procedure has its own times, and it has to be like that. A piece of legislation, if it goes through parliament and goes through the whole procedure, becomes richer. The same applies, for example, to the judicial system. If a trial lasts for too little, then it is deprived of value. So the power exercised by leaders has a more immediate relationship with time and reality. The reality is pressing, and so decision maker they have to respond to reality, and so they need to know what the time is, basically. Then, as regards the legacy, in replying to your previous question, I didn't answer to your question on Moses, but I'll do it now. Well, Moses, as you reminded, basically was not willing at the beginning to lead the Jewish people, but he did then, eventually. He eventually did. So he did that in 40 years. From Egypt to Palestine, it takes about 20 days. But actually, God told him to go there. And there were no clocks. Basically, in the desert, the situation was a bit more complicated. During that time, the more prolonged the time, you probably remember of the murmurings. So actually, everybody was complaining. Everybody was complaining because they did not understand where they had been brought. Leaders constantly have to motivate their own people. They have to constantly motivate the people that follow them. They have to fix objectives, and there was yet another objective to fix. To reach the promised land was at a given time not possible because it was occupied. So Václav Havel, a leader who was very dear to the meeting, once told that when he became a president he was put in prison in October 89, and then at the end of December he was already the Hungarian president. And back then he wrote, and this is something that he wrote in a book entitled The Art of Impossible. He wrote, and I quote, "I felt like Sisyphus." So you remember the story of Sisyphus. But fact is that the stone was no longer there. It had rolled down, and then he managed to redefine his objectives and the objectives of those who led him there. So he first basically capable of leading the country. So he felt as if Sisyphus no longer had his stone. He felt as he didn't have his function. And then Havel left a legacy. He left a mark. He left a Czech Republic, which was democratic, with a market economy in favor of the NATO. So a good mayor is someone who turns reality, who transforms reality. He's a leader who's capable of changing the face of a quarter, of a neighborhood, for example, changing the lives of the people living there. So the extent of your leadership depends basically on the promised land. Moses didn't enter the promised land. So Moses didn't enter the promised land. He asked to be buried in the promised land. And this for reasons which are still, and he was not granted that possibility. So we do not know where he's buried. However, his legacy and the new targets he set basically turned a people into a nation, contributed to, in a way, creating a leading class, and this leading class eventually created the nation of Israel. Moses was not a loser because he didn't arrive at the finishing line. So apparently Moses didn't arrive at the finishing line, but Moses' leadership history tells us that we have learned something from these events. Anna Arendt, for example, used to say that clearly if we were to judge a leadership based on achievement or non-achievement, well, Moses' leadership would be judged as unsuccessful because he didn't arrive in the promised land. And in another book talking about the war between two peoples, there was a Greek poet, and the Greek were actually one of the two peoples involved in the war, and the Trojans. And Arendt said Homer, who was Greek, thought it was appropriate to tell the stories and the gestures of those who won and of those who lost. So if you read the Iliad, you do not notice that Homer was a Greek. And why was this the case? Because with that book, with the symbolic experiences, we learned that if we are to judge human existence, success and insuccess are not reliable categories. The reliable categories depend on what human experience leaves, on the legacy of human experience after it ends. And the same applies to leadership.
Gianluca, allora parto da
Gianluca, let's start from a different story you mentioned in your book. David Market, who is the captain of the Santa Fe boat, and he introduces a new leadership model where the leader is a leader, which is different from the classical structure where the leader is the leader and followers. So what do you think that this model is about? Because it seems particularly interesting. So what happens to Captain David McKay? Was one of the best in his course. He was a captain of the American Marine, and he was the captain of a submarine called Olympia. Great crew. He started studying. He learns how everything works in the submarine. But 2 weeks before becoming the captain of that submarine, he was told, no, you cannot be the captain of that submarine. You need to be moved to Santa Fe, which actually had the worst crew in the whole of the American Marine. So he started studying again. When he was ready, or he thought he was ready, he started to act as a captain and giving orders. And he would give an order and everybody would answer, yay, captain. So when he finally decided to organize an exercise, so he switches the nuclear engine off, the submarine. Now we will navigate with the battery of the submarine, and you have to fix the engine in a certain given time. In order to make this simulation even more challenging, he said, now we increase the speed so that the battery lasts less. So he says, let's go on to a higher speed. That's the order he gives. But actually, after a while, he notices that the speed hasn't changed, and he asked his second man, what is happening? And he said, yeah, I gave your order, but there is no way to reach this speed with this battery, with this engine. And the captain asks, well, then why did you give the order if you knew that it wasn't possible? And his second man said, because you told me to do so, Captain. So this anecdote makes him rethink this command model, because he had always seen it as someone giving an order and someone carrying it out. But a submarine, which is a very complex machine, cannot be managed this way with this leader-follower model. This model works if you have to build a pyramid. One gives the order and all the others carry out a very simple task that can be divided into small parts. But in the complex society we live in today, it is not possible to solve complex problems this way. You need a leader-leader model where I give you the possibility, the chance to take your own decisions. You can decide. And this is fundamental. And I'll just share another anecdote, because you can reach some results today if the people working with you do their work. If you don't choose the right workers, the right people to work with you, then you have a problem. When I was a young employee, we had the myth of Sanssouci, who was a Nobel Prize and a very important figure in terms of human rights. But in the end, she had turned into someone who was an accomplice of the military regime that had persecuted the Rohingya people with thousands of dead and refugees. There is a study that says, why did this happen? Why the Nobel Prize for Peace becomes an accomplice of the greatest massacre taking place in our time? So the study analyzes the situation. That depends on the people she was working with. She didn't work with the people who had supported her from the very beginning in her pacifist struggles, but a series of X-men that when she started to work along a different path did not stop her. They didn't tell her this is not the right way to proceed. So choosing the right people is the most important thing. So I'll stop here because we are almost late, but I would like to listen to the last intervention. Thank you.
Christian, come il bene comune, così introduciamo anche...
So the common good, the passion for the public service, how can all this become a motivational driver? And what is the kind of leadership you think is more efficient? Well, after what my co-speaker said, there is not much I can add. I can talk about my own experience. At the beginning, I gave you the example of the waiter. When we talk about the passing of time, there's another important image to face these challenges, is that of the guardian. So this is fundamental in approaching in the reality of a public administration like that of Milan, is to understand that you're not working with things that you own, they are not yours. The mayor of the Municipality of Milan will not be there forever. So well, this is obvious. They are working on things that they don't belong to them. But you have responsibility on the whole of the community, not only towards those who voted for you. And in the end, the most interesting image is that of the guardian, this person who actually takes care of a building, of a garden, someone who makes sure that everything runs smoothly, that society develops, and it's just the guardian of the society. I don't want to make any kind of quote of the Bible, but that's what Saint Joseph was. And this is an image that I always carry with me. Another aspect I would like to talk about is my experience from the human point of view that, well, are not always actually highlighted. At the end of the day, I have always the feeling that my job is not done. It's not finished. And in particularly, the way I've worked with people will not be enough to generate a change, to create better services, to solve the issues of the city. So it is as if often this disappointment that I feel has never been expressed or faced. Maybe because we have a more, so to speak, ancient approach to leadership. And then there is another thing that I would like to mention. And, well, I always go back to my first experience in the region of Lombardy. So the top of the pyramid needs to become the first example for everyone of what leadership is. So it has to motivate, to share the contents of what he does. It has to monitor, and if necessary, it has to correct. So this is a responsibility in terms of examples and methodology. So this is what my personal experience. This is what I'm trying to do myself. With that feeling I was talking before, and at the beginning of each new day, I have a new generosity, so to speak. We have so many people working in the municipality of Milan. We start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and everyone has to be given the chance to have a direct dialogue with the top management, so to speak. So there is some form of a generosity of offering yourself. It's a sacrifice, so to speak. These two aspects of this disappointment, this suffering, and this other aspect of offering yourself, this generosity. So these are two important elements. Thank you.
Allora, non ci crederete, noi abbiamo il countdown qui davanti.
So we have a timer here in front of us, so we just have 40 seconds left. And I just have to say that I'm really happy, and I would like to thank you all, because you actually shared with us a lot of facts, experiences, anecdotes that are food for thought, and actually in a very unconventional way. I would like to add a personal anecdote. This summer, I had the chance to spend 2 days with a lady who was turning 80 this year, who was here in Italy after 56 years as a missionary in Brazil. And one evening she told me she was in Milan, and she was saying that she had to take the yellow line of the underground. So that means that you really have to take the stairs underground. And I was on the escalators, and I thought, well, I should knee down, because I thought of all the workers, the builders who built these stairs and who worked hard for me to be able to take these escalators into this underground. And I must say, I had never thought about this in so many years that I use the underground in Milan. And so I would like to add a further concept. A leader is someone who identifies and shares a goal, the reason why you do what you're doing. So once again, I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank our audience. And please, a big round of applause for our guests.
Voglio dare questo avviso alla fine.
So to conclude, please help the meeting, because you can participate in creating a place that is important for you and the world. There is no civilization without culture. Dialogue is its breathing, its breath. So you can all contribute to carry on the great history of the Rimini meeting. You can find the Dona Ora stands around the fairgrounds that are marked by a red heart. So donate at these desks, at these stands, where our volunteers with the red T-shirt wait for you. The Rimini Meeting Foundation is a foundation of the tertiary sector, so if you donate, you can benefit in fiscal terms. Thank you, and have a nice evening, everyone.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli